see if I can make the camera just a little more level. Okay, so we need to talk about new products. And again, the second exam is on D2L. If you go to the assignments tab on D2L, let me just switch out of this for 1 second. That. If you go to assessments, quizzes, the second exam is there. You'll have class time under that. It's 2.1 on Thursday. So we will not meet on Thursday. So you have that day to work on the exam. There is no essay on the second exam. Yay, isn't that great? We can all clap now. Because of some time compression, I won't have sufficient time to grade it. So there's no essay on the second exam. So you have Thursday to work on that in class, so you don't have to be here on Thursday. We should finish new products today, and then you'll have all of the material you need for the second exam. So new products. Some scholars who are interested in marketing strategy say that new companies need to constantly be developing new products, and they have specific numbers that they say that they need to be developing constantly. Some estimate that new companies need to be developing 25 or more new products at a time. I think that's depending on sort of the industry that you're in, obviously. If you are in the drug industry, if you're Pfizer or J&J or Moderna or something like that, the number of new products you need to be developing at any one time is probably significantly more than that, because we've constantly got things like COVID coming out, and COVID is now mutating, and so there's questions as to whether or not the current vaccines are going to be effective. Vaccines are only effective, again, if you haven't caught the disease, if you've caught the illness, having to treat it. And that's just one disease, right? There's lots of other diseases and things out there that people die from. And so you probably need to be doing more than that. A lot of those drugs that you're working on will fail. They're just not going to be successful in clinical trials. And so that may be more. If you have a business like my family business, which is a bed and breakfast and entertainment venue, we couldn't possibly be developing 25 new products at the same time. We do develop new ideas and new menu items and things like that for the restaurant, but to try and develop 25 new every month or something like that would just be an overwhelming task for a small business, and most small businesses don't do that. So when they say 25, remember that you're talking about, are we talking about J&J, Moderna, or are we talking about a small, mid-sized business? Obviously convenience stores, sort of have the same products and have had the same products for years and years and years. New consumer packaged goods come out and they'll try them, or they'll put them on the shelves and see if they sell, but they're not necessarily developing new products. But large companies, which is what the text generally tends to focus on, obviously need to be constantly developing new products. So when we talk about new product development, one of the things is how are we going to classify the products, and that's going to influence how we develop. Obviously, tangible goods, things that we can touch, taste, feel, see, hear, are different than intangible services like legal services, which are highly, far more customizable. It's hard to make a legal service that one size fits all. Now they're trying in many respects. When I became a lawyer, this was before legal Zoom, right? Before the age of the internet really started taking off in terms of service delivery. And LegalZoom says, basically there are all of these sort of similarly situated people, and we can sort of create forms and things like that will satisfy a large number of people. However, having said that, most people have somewhat unique situations. Let's just think about a divorce, right? It seems like, we know statistically that 50% of all relationships are likely to end that are consummated in a legally recognized union called marriage are probably going to end in divorce. Now, it would seem that, since there's so many of them, we could just sort of have a template. And there are some standardization of forms for divorce, but every situation is somewhat unique, isn't it? In that you have kids, that complicates things. Who's going to be the primary person that's responsible for the kids? What kind of assets do you have? What kind of debts do you have? And so we can get some amount of standardization, but there's still a high degree of customization in legal services because people are inherently unique in the sort of things that they are experiencing may be unique to that situation. And that's not necessarily true if we're talking about a tangible good or service where, the hoodie that you're wearing over there, we can mass produce that for a lot of people, right? In sort of standardized sizes. And that's less a unique sort of product or service. So are we talking about tangible good? Are we talking about services, which are intangibles, things like intellectual property, activities, benefits that come along with the use of certain goods and are ancillary to those goods? Are we talking about ideas? When we talk about new product development, we can also think about, since I taught political marketing, things like the political marketplace. Things are rapidly changing, right? Government has to respond to the needs of the people, and we have to come up with new ways of doing that, or else the government itself may become a failed state. When COVID-19 hit, that presented a major challenge for both national, state, and local governments to deal with and to respond to. Because if you don't deal with it effectively, what ends up happening is it can crater your economy and you can have massive unemployment. So there's this balance, and government had to come up with programs and policies to deal with this that allow us to continue to function in a post-industrial economy while also trying to avoid massive casualties in terms of a death toll. And so government has to come up with new ideas and new policies and things like that. So when we talk about new product development, it's not just businesses that do this, it's also the government and the nonprofits and those other sectors of the economy. And those are largely, and in a post-industrial world, those are largely idea generation, right? Public policy is not something that you can taste, touch, feel, smell. It's something that it's an idea generation and then going through the legislative process and then through the regulatory process to implement those kinds of things. So are we talking about, again, a good that's tangible? Are we talking about a service? Coming up with new product lines in your services as an attorney, for example. If I decide that, it's really getting to be very popular for all of you to have your YouTube channel, and it wouldn't have necessarily been the case that 25 years ago, a lawyer from Guthrie, Oklahoma would have to know something about intellectual property, but as people are now developing this stuff, who owns that copyright? And you might find yourself saying, I've got all these young clients that are now coming into Guthrie and they're developing YouTube channels. There's all kinds of movies that are now being filmed, for example, in my hometown. So maybe I need to add an intellectual property focus to my practice, or I need to learn something about this. And how do I do that? If we're talking about consumer products, things that are purchased by the consumer, so a B2C product as opposed to a B2B, what type of product is it? With regard to tangible goods and services, and that's going to determine how in-depth the protocol that we have to go through to develop new products is going to be. So for example, is it a convenience product? What are convenience products? Well, convenience products are like the Coca-Cola that you consume. This doesn't have Coke in it, it has unsweet tea. and now it's water. It's my water thing, but Coca-Cola, that's a consumer packaged good. Right? It comes in a bottle. Are we talking about that kind of product? It's a convenience product. It's found everywhere. Where can you buy Coke, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, things like that? Well, you can buy it in the vending machine upstairs. I think that's really good for vending machines. We used to have a student lounge over here, and all the vending machines were in that. And then they decided that we had to have that for a testing center, so they moved them. I think they're upstairs, right? You can buy them over at the student union and sort of the little convenience store, or you can buy it in the food court. You can buy it at Target across the streets, at the Walmart neighborhood market. So we're talking about a convenience product that's sold everywhere, in all these sort of different places and in different modes and different channels. Or are we talking about a shopping product, something that's more of a risk? What are shopping products? Things like washers and dryers, televisions, those things that are more expensive and we're going to take more time to buy. Although in this day and age, even those have become more and more, sort of instant purchases. When I was a kid growing up, again, not that long ago, there were actually people who repaired televisions. There were lots of people who had television repair businesses. And if your tube went out, so these large pieces they were almost, when I was a young child, they were like furniture. They came in nice cabinets that were made of, wood. And this was a product that you spent a lot of money on, and if something went wrong with it, you called the television repairman. What do you do now? I mean, my brother's the first flat screen television that we bought in my family was from my brother when he went to law school, and it was like $1,000, and it was pretty heavy, and it was a small screen. And now you can get what, a 52-inch television for less than $1,000 at Walmart. One person, other than the fact that they're awkward, one person can easily lift it and carry it. And when it goes out, it doesn't have a tube anymore like they used to. What do? You pitch it in the dump. You put it out at the curb during big trash day, and you go buy another one because they're cheap, right? You can get a television that's the size of these monitors for $100. Right? I mean, it's like right at around $100. These are not expensive, necessarily huge purchases like they used to be. So are we talking about a convenience product, shopping product, and these categories, things that we used to shop for and spend a lot of time are becoming less and less expensive, and so maybe they're even reaching the point where they're kind of convenience products. Is it a specialty product that you're going to have to really do it's going to be more expensive? Customized furniture, or just picking out the new bedroom suit that you can go down to Mathis Brothers and you can pick what kind of finish and things like that you want. Or is it an unsought product? Unsought products are ones that we generally don't think about needing until it's an emergency. I don't know anybody who says my favorite wrecker service is, whatever. Kinney's Wrecker in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Generally speaking, when you need a wrecker, you get on your phone in this day and age, and you look at AAA or something like that, and they send something to you. So is it an unsought product? When we talk about new product development, all of these sort of categories are important in determining how we're going to go about developing that. Is it a business product? So business products are purchased by organizations to assist in providing products for other people. So is it a component item, something that's going to become part of the final product? So is it the paint for a car? And how do they source paint? Well, I used to have a friend who worked for the GM plant when it was here in Oklahoma City. He retired from that plant before they shut it down, and he was in charge of the paint shop. He ordered all of the paint. So is it things like paint for the car? And generally speaking, business products, they're just looking for what? The the lowest cost, right? That meets the quality specifications that they want? Is it a support product that's used to assist in production of other goods and services? A lot of support products now. So I am a service provider. What am I providing? I am providing educational services to you. My colleagues over, when I was a professor in the College of the Liberal Arts, would be horrified to hear me say this, but I view very much what I do as being a provider of services. Right? And they are horrified by that because they don't think that we should view you as the consumer, but to some extent you are the consumer, and you're becoming more and more the consumer as the state pays for less and less of the cost of educating you. And you're shouldering more and more of that burden. You really are, in many respects, the consumer. And so what are some of the products that I need to provide that service? Well, when I first started teaching, it's been a long time. I've been here 26 or 27 years now. When I first started teaching, there were lots of people, myself included, I missed chalkboards. You know, that was, you started writing on the board, an outline. Rather than doing PowerPoint, you would, sort of make an outline on the board and go through that. Or you had these overhead projectors, and you put transparencies on the overhead projector. And I'm told a bunch of my students, often in this course, and then when I teach professional sales, are fashion marketing majors. Anybody in here a fashion marketing major? No, I usually have like one fashion marketing major. There is apparently at least one professor over in fashion marketing, which is in the Human Environmental Sciences Department, who still uses an overhead projector and transparencies. And I just kind of sit there and think, like, we're in the 21st century, lady. Where do you even find an overhead projector? Apparently they still have them over there, right? But, so what are some of the products that I need now? Well, we need these projectors so that I can put up my PowerPoint on the screen. I need a computer so that I can develop that PowerPoint, right? All of the PowerPoints that I use, I don't use the book's PowerPoints. I develop my own PowerPoints because the book, I think they've got horrible PowerPoints. They don't know how to make PowerPoints. And mine are probably somewhat too much. The people who are experts in sort of communication and study this say that when you hand somebody a PowerPoint, they shouldn't be able to tell where you're going with the PowerPoint, right? It's just supposed to be bullet points to like 1 or 2 words to jog your memory. So your computer, I need this phone so that people that are on the extended section and watching us on YouTube can text questions to me, right? So that's a support product. Installations, this building, this classroom is an installation. Corporations build facilities so that they can manufacture stuff, that's an installation. Is it an accessory equipment, so tools, office equipment? And these are not necessarily mutually exclusive categories, right? So the computer is office equipment, it's also a support product that's being used. Is it supplies, things like the toilet paper, the paper towels, the disinfecting wipes that we now all have to have, so that we can maintain some level of safety in this age of COVID. Or is it industrial services, repair, maintenance, legal, accounting, auditing services? And how are those changing? Again, when my family started out in business in 1986 in Guthrie, Oklahoma, the vast majority of things that we bought, we purchased with a check. You wrote a check for them. Anybody still write checks? Maybe you write live checks? Do you have a checking account? It's called a checking account, and it really should be called a debit card account, right? Because you're not actually writing checks for the most part anymore. Some businesses still like to write checks, but that's a change in the way that we're doing business. These banking services now. It used to be when I started teaching in the College of Business, I didn't have the PhD, I was a lawyer, so they transferred me from political science over here when most of the legal studies courses got put into college business. And I taught something called the law of commercial transactions. And a big portion of that course focuses on the banking system and banking regulations. And when I first started teaching that course years and years and years ago, there was still the way a check was processed. It went through these various clearinghouses. So most banks didn't have a relationship with the Federal Reserve directly. So they would have to pass the check to a bank that did, and they would then pass it into the clearing system, and there were regions. Now, and so there was a definition of what constituted a local check, right? And you probably, at the time, businesses themselves considered local checks to be, a check that was written on the bank in the town the business was in, but that wasn't the legal definition of what was a local check for banking purposes. A local check was in the same check clearing region. Now all checks are local because there's one clearinghouse that they all go through. And it's all electronic. When you deposit a check, you can do this now in your bank. They have mobile banking. You can take a picture of the front and the back of the check and deposit it into your account. And that goes through a routing system that's all electronic now. They used to actually send the checks, so the bank in Guthrie, and again, when I first started teaching, they would, the end of the business day for banking, so that they could close out their books, was 3 o'clock. And then they would batch everything up and they would send it to a bank in Oklahoma City that had a relationship with the Fed, and there was a clearinghouse in the Federal Reserve, or part of the clearing system in the Federal Reserve building, and these checks would then be routed through the clearinghouse, sent back to the banks on which they were written, and they would actually send you every month, at the end of the month, they would actually send you all the canceled checks in these big fat envelopes. Now, most businesses don't even do that. Then they went to photocopying the checks because the postage was so expensive, particularly for businesses, for banks to send out these huge bundles of checks. My mother's business, we would get probably a 2-inch envelope every month with all of our canceled checks in it. Then they went to photocopying the checks, scanning and photocopying, and send you photocopies. And now, what do most people do? If you get checks back at all, it's all electronic, right? Most people go for electronic banking. So those are all things that have changed, and all examples of how products and services had to develop in order to meet those sorts of needs in a constantly dynamic environment. So we also have to think about, when we're talking about new products, how is that going to affect other things? So other items, lines, and mixes in our company. Most companies don't just manufacture one thing. Some industrial companies maybe just manufacture one thing. But most of us that are in business, we do several things. We produce and provide several things. So in my family's business, we're a lodging business. We do Murder Mystery Weekend, so we do entertainment. We have a restaurant associated with that, so we prepare food. So all of those things are an item that we provide, right? A service, some of it's tangible, some of it's intangible. So an item, a product item, is a specific stock keeping unit, a SKU. So when you go to Walmart and you buy this is a specific SKU, right? This is specific stock keeping unit. Then you have product lines, which are closely related. So what are closely related to this? What would be something in the same line as this? What? The Clorox wipes, right? It's a different company. Even within that same thing, but not a wipe, what else would you have? That would be part of the product line. Lysol spray, disinfecting spray, right? The paper towels that you need to use the disinfecting spray, or the mirror cleaners and things like that. And then your mixes are all the lines that are offered by an organization. So Walmart has hundreds of thousands, right, of SKUs, thousands of probably product lines, all together under one big box store in their product mix. So how do we define newness? What does it mean when we say something's new in terms of a product? Well, when we think about newness, we can think about it in relation to existing products. So the first smartphone that came out, it wasn't an Apple phone. Apple has sort of taken the idea and made it a lot better. The first smartphone that came out, the first phone that did more than just call, the first cellular device. Again, when I was a kid growing up, almost nobody had these. Only the very wealthy had them. And they were the first, I remember the first car phone that my mother had. It had this huge antenna on it. They were mounted in the car. You didn't work very well. It relied on sort of radio. And then they came out with cellular, which was better communication, right? So the first satellite, the first smartphone that came out that did something more than just call. So basically the first one was kind of a PDA, a personal data assistant combined with a phone. So it had phone book in it, things like that that you would, all expect to have in your smartphone. Now, 30 years after that first smartphone came out, 20 or 30 years, somewhere in that ballpark. What is this? How different is the iPhone 7 from the iPhone 6? And now we're on what version of the iPhone? Is it 12 or 13? 12. How different is, so this is a 10. How different is the 10 from 12? Can you tell the difference? Like the big difference when you went to the 10 from the 9 or whatever I had before was that they had totally done away with the little button. I think that was the 9, still had the little part of the button, well, that's gone. But how different is it really other than that? Well, it's got better facial recognition to open it, but uses apps. It's the same sort of touch screen. It's not all that different. They'll tell you like the camera's far better on this one than it was, and it is. It's much better than the camera that I have on. I didn't have a 7. I had an 8. I think. It's far better. But is it really radically different at this point in time? Can you tell that much difference between this and the 12? I'm not sure that you can. Okay, so the first one was the Simon Personal Communication made by IBM. That is radically different than the iPhone, right? Today, but is this that much different from the other? So we can talk about newness from the consumer's perspective. Largely that's going to be how much learning is required by the consumer. The first smartphone I got, it took a lot of time to learn how to do this. The first one I got was a BlackBerry. Do any of you remember BlackBerry? Okay, so you remember the first one I got was, and it took a lot to learn, that you could send email with it, you could do all of these things with it. It had a full keyboard. That was kind of nice. That was one of the things that was nice I thought about. You could actually type, and not have to look at the screen. You can't really do that with an iPhone. So, it required a lot of learning, as opposed to just sort of changes and features that don't require a whole lot of learning, a whole lot of new learning. They come up with new scents. The big thing is, and I think this is largely a product, I was talking to my friends the other day, one of the things that I've noticed is almost, and it happened because we went somewhere and somebody was just wearing an overwhelming amount of cologne. It was like they had just doused themselves in cologne. And almost none of you wear an enormous amount of perfume or cologne. When I turned 21, overwhelmingly, you could still smoke in restaurants at that point in time. You could still smoke on airline flights. You could still smoke in the mall. I mean, people smoked everywhere, and I think that's one of the reasons that we wore lots of cologne, was you had to cover up the overwhelming scent of smoke that everybody had. Nobody smokes anymore, and people are becoming more sensitive, and the allergies are, we're more aware of the reactions that people have, and so people don't wear a whole lot of scented stuff anymore. Perfumes, shampoos, and things like that when I was growing up, again, because I think it was largely as a result of the fact that everybody smoked, were heavily scented. Now, the big trend is to have no scent in soap and cleaning products and laundry detergent. That doesn't require any new learning. It's just a different experience. You don't, the way you use the laundry detergent, if it's scent-free or unscented, is the same way you used the laundry detergent before. It doesn't require any learning. It's just a different experience. You're not going to smell this overwhelmingly flowery, sort of floral, assault on your senses. Dynamically continuous innovation, minor changes that may be required in terms of your behavior. One of the things that they've done with the new updates, and it used to be that you could avoid these. The phone would say, there's an update, and you could choose whether or not you wanted to do the update. Now, your phone, at some point, if you don't update it, it will just, like, at 2 a.m, it will update itself. And one of the things that's, dynamic continuous change is, it used to be that with this phone, for those of you who had the iPhone, when somebody called, it popped up on the whole screen. What does it do now? If you're using some other app, what happens? It pops up at the top, and it's really obnoxious because it's hard if you have fat fingers like I do. It's hard to hit the button right, and so I'm constantly hanging up on something. Like, I think that's a bad dynamic continuous change. But they did that because before, whatever app you had open, if somebody called, the whole screen would pop up, right? And I guess somebody probably complained and thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could just keep doing what I'm doing? So now it pops up at the top of the screen, right? Which leads me to half the time hanging up on whoever is calling. So I'm sure they'll come out with something new that will, will be at the bottom of the screen, or I don't know. It will talk to you or something. They'll try and fix it. They require minor changes in behavior. You're still touching the screen and hitting the green button to answer it. It's just a minor change. And then you can have discontinuous innovation, where you have higher levels of learning that are required. When police body cams came out, police officers, cameras have been around forever. We've used cameras in all kinds of settings. I mean, this is not a new thing to have cameras at the bank, and cameras on the ATM, and cameras on Bronco Pond. We have cameras over there to make sure that you don't go swimming in the pond. If you did go swimming in the pond, I would very concerned about your health and safety from getting into that water, but we put up these cameras. So cameras have been around, police officers know what cameras are, and since Rodney King, they know that they may be photographed, right? And people are doing this. That was a radical thing. Like, somebody had this, this video recorder, and they caught the police engaging in police brutality against this guy in Los Angeles named Rodney King, and that was the first one of those to really go viral. And then the police, reacted to that by trying to stop people from photographing them and saying it's a crime, and that's really, it was a violation of your civil rights. And now you can't do it because everybody's got one of these phones, and you can't stop everybody, right? And so there's been a level of learning. When they first put body cameras on them, they had this required some level of learning. Everybody knows what a camera is, they know how it works, but training police officers on how to use make sure the camera's on, and it was new, so there was some higher level of learning than just sort of understanding, about cameras and things like that. But now, almost all police departments use them. And initially, they didn't meet with overwhelming success from the police department perspective because a lot of people were getting away from it. One of the things in the early days of them having these body cameras and dashboard cameras in their car and stuff like that happened. I used to practice criminal law from time to time, and I used to do a lot of DUIs for people because it's pretty easy. You can make pretty good money at it. But it started happening that there's a presumption that if you blow 0.08, that you are intoxicated. And by the way, that level has changed. When I first started practicing law, it was 0.10. And now it's 0.08, and I think they're talking about going to 0.05. Right? I mean, so this level has changed, but they put these dashboard cams in police vehicles with these body cameras, and all of a sudden juries were looking at these, and they're like, he passed the field sobriety test. Doesn't look too, he blew a point, 1.2, but he's not slurring his words, and they wouldn't convict. It really bothered a lot of cops all of a sudden that, people are getting off because this new technology is changing the way police were doing their jobs, right? There's a legal aspect to it. So the FTC says that you can say something is new from up to 6 months from regular distribution. Now, what constitutes regular distribution of a product? What constitutes regular distribution? Well, that's up for debate, right? 6 months from regular distribution. Well, what's regular distribution? Is that when you release it nationwide? Some things never get released nationwide. Movies, historically, now this has changed because now movies are starting to stream, but historically, again, when I was a kid growing up, they would make movies, and some movies had national releases because they were generally going to be popular everywhere. Sort of rom-coms are kind of, universally popular in all markets. But one of my favorite movies, I grew up in northern New Mexico for a big portion of my life, and I still have family there, and go back a lot to visit my family. My father has a ranch in northern New Mexico. He's Hispanic. We're, what would be Mexican American, although our family has been in what is New Mexico since before it was part of the United States. But, one of the movies that came out when I was a kid, and it's my favorite movie probably of all time, because it's so beautifully filmed in northern New Mexico, and it talks about something that we all are familiar with in that part of the country. If you are in a farming and ranching family at all, it deals with water rights, and it's called the Milagro Beanfield War. You all have never heard of this movie. There's movies from that time that I would be willing to bet if I asked you if you'd seen them, you'd probably say yes. You'd seen things like, Pretty Woman. So that's sort of saying, how many of you have at least heard of Pretty Woman? How many of you have seen Pretty Woman? Everybody in here. I'm always kind of amazed at how many of my students have seen Pretty Woman, because it's a really old movie at the time, right? But Milagro Beanfield War, it was really popular in the Southwest. That's where it was released. It wasn't released to a national audience. So what is regular distribution? If you have a limited release of something like a movie, is it new? Movies used to be graded on whether it was first run, second run, dollar show, right? That's all changing because the way movies are now released is streaming automatically, particularly in COVID. We can think about it from an organizational perspective in terms of newness. How much risk is there from the organization's perspective? Is this really a new product, Or is this just sort of an extension, low risk and cannibalization of our already existing products? Apple does this deliberately. They release a new iPhone every 18 months or so. It's just cannibalization, right? And the idea is to get you to buy the newest and latest version. And initially, when there were big changes from the first iPhone to the second to the third, and they were really making huge innovations, that people were buying them. Now, I don't know that it's worth it for me to go out and get the 12 as opposed to the 10, or to have the new iPad. I mean, it's got a processor that you can't tell the difference, really. Gaming computers. My nephew's into all of these gaming, and he keeps insisting, he keeps telling his dad he's got to have a better computer. And I'm like, just turn down the graphics. He'll never, he's like, it's running slow, got to get a new computer. I'm like, just adjust the graphics, Ralph. I'll never notice. Because some of the things that you really need this high processing speed for are, like the water ripples in a realistic. Does that really add to the enjoyment of the game, all that? But I don't know, right? So, cannibalization, low risk. Is there significant innovation? Again, in the early series of iPhones, there was significant innovation. The cameras got better and better and better. I mean, I remember the first phone that I had, and I thought this was a stupid, like when I got the first smartphone with a camera, I thought, that's stupid. Who the hell wants to take, and the pictures were horrible. It was just not a great quality. But then they started coming out with better quality, and then of course social media took off. And so now, like, nobody prints pictures off anymore. When I was a kid, people would take their film and they would take it and have it processed at these places. Walmart still has some, although they don't have somebody back there manning it anymore. You pretty much can go in and insert your media into something and get pictures printed off, or you can buy printers that will print off pictures fairly well. But like, I can't tell you the last time I actually printed out a picture of something. Why would you do that? You've got Instagram and Pinterest and whatever else. I mean, why would you print something off anymore? Is it a brand extension? So Google is a technology company. They are involved in, searching the web and things like that, but they came out with a phone, the Google Pixel. Not terribly successful. Brand extension, in my opinion. New product success or failure. Most companies fail, most new products fail. Even companies that do a lot of extensive marketing research have products that fail. When I was a kid, Coke decided there was something called the Pepsi Challenge, and they said people preferred Pepsi 2-1 to Coke, which is the way they did that test was there's lots of problems with the product test and the way they did it. And Pepsi, I will tell you, is a tool of the devil, communist, inferior product to Coca-Cola. But Coke decided, they've got this Pepsi Challenge, and Pepsi is saying people prefer it 2-1. And most people do prefer it. The way that they did the taste test in the Pepsi Challenge is they gave you 2 little cups of 1 ounce of product each. And for 1 ounce, people do prefer the sweeter, communist tool of the devil product that Pepsi is over Coke. But for 12 ounces, they don't. It's just too sweet. It's like the fruit of the vine that, the devil tempted Eve with. Too sweet. So Coke decides that they've got to, meet Pepsi, and they're going to launch this new product, and it was called New Coke, and it was sweeter, and it was a miserable failure. Coca-Cola is, at one point in time was the most iconic brand in the world. When we talk about branding, Coca-Cola has for long periods of time been the most valuable brand in the world. And it was a failure. So businesses fail overwhelmingly within the first 5 years. 95% of businesses, or 90% of businesses fail. New products fail. New Coke failed. So how do we make sure that that doesn't happen? Well, you should go through this protocol. You should have a well-defined target market. Identify the target, and is that market profitable? Is it going to be a big enough market? There may be a market for people who love Cupid dolls, but it's really small, I'm going to guess. You may have a well-defined target market, but it may not be big enough. How are you going to specify your customers' needs and wants and preferences? How are you going to determine that? And then how will your product satisfy those needs, wants, and preferences? How are you going to achieve that? So why do products fail? There's an insignificant point of difference. I think that the Apple's ability to continually sell at some point in time, this launching of new products, it's just not going to have the same impact. People don't care that much. There's not a significant point of difference. Again, there's a big difference between my 10 and the first Apple, the first iPhone that I got. Anymore, is the camera that much better? I don't know. There's no economic access to buyers. So many consumer packaged goods fail because they don't have access. Stores like Walmart and retailers expect slotting fees. And if you're a small company starting out, and I used to have a woman named Mary Boothman come talk to my class. She's actually a UCO graduate. She started a company, and her company's story is sort of like my story in terms of my career path. My career could be called "I don't want to do that," being talked into it by somebody, and it becoming pretty successful, right? So, I knew I wanted to go to law school. I went to law school. I took my first class in property, which I thought was a horrible class, but I did really well in it. And the teacher pulls me aside and she says, you ought to think about focusing on intellectual property. And I thought, yeah, I kind of want to do that. I wanted to be a civil rights litigator. That was my dream, was to be, like a First Amendment attorney, litigation. And she's like, well, you ought to think about doing intellectual property because nobody wants to do it and you can make money at it. So I listened to her. I took all of the intellectual property courses. I got pretty good at it, and that's how I became a corporate vice president, executive vice president of a publicly traded company, because I could do this stuff. I had this knowledge, and I had done it for UCO. I got recruited. When I was associate general counsel for UCO, out of the blue, this headhunter calls me, and they're like, well, we noticed you filed a trademark. We'd like to talk to you about coming to work for our company. And so, something that I never wanted to do. I wanted to do civil rights litigation. There isn't a lot of money, by the way, in civil rights litigation. There's a lot of money in intellectual property, right? So I was talked into doing this. I decided that I didn't really like being a lawyer. I didn't like representing a company. It was a lot of work. I wanted to go back to higher education. I wanted to be a professor again. And so I thought, well, I'm going to get my PhD, and I my bachelor's degree and my master's degree in political science. I thought I'll go get a PhD in political science. And my friend who I owned an airplane with at one time said, I think you'll want to get a PhD in marketing. I don't want to do that. I don't know anything about marketing. I'm not a business professor. I like liberal arts. That's where I'm at. And he said, well, I'm going to tell you why you want to be a PhD in marketing, because there are 12 jobs for every newly minted PhD, and the average starting salary of a PhD in marketing is $160,000 a year. The average starting salary in political science, if you can find a job, because there are 200 applicants for every job, if you can find a job, is $45,000 a year. And I thought, wow, I can do that. For that amount of money difference, I can do. So I went and I got my PhD in marketing, and it's been overwhelmingly a pretty good thing. And when I wanted to come back to UCO for my career, they said, the department chair met me and she said, well, we've started the sales program, so you need to say you're interested in sales. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to do sales. Like, that's not what I want to do political marketing. And so I got talked into doing the sales thing. And then I started going to sales competitions with our students and being the coach. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more fun than sales competitions. And they are like extraordinarily fun. We run a sales competition. And it's just, and to see kids get jobs from these, I have 100% placement of my majors and minors in this program. Yeah, it's an enormous amount of fun, right? So one of the things, the reason I tell you this, that one of the people I used to have when I started teaching here again was this woman who graduated from UCO. And she was like me. She had, they moved back to Enid from California. They'd moved to California. They'd been fairly successful. And then her parents and her husband's parents were getting older. They decided they needed to move back to Oklahoma, sort of semi-retire. They couldn't find any Mexican food. Now, every state has different Mexican food. I'm from New Mexico, and New Mexico Mexican is different than any place else. But they were from Southern California, and there's a flavor out there, and they couldn't find it. And her husband said, we ought to start a Mexican restaurant. And she said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to start a Mexican restaurant. And he talks her into starting this Mexican restaurant in Enid. It becomes very, very popular. And people started saying things like, well, do you sell your salsa? Because they made their own salsa. And she's like, no. And he's like, we should start bottling salsa. And she said, we don't know anything about this. I don't think we should do that. That doesn't sound like a very good idea. And he's like, well, there's a food company here in Enid that manufactures food. And they went and talked to him, and now they no longer have a restaurant. They have a whole line of food. And she managed to get it into Walmart. That's unusual. Because usually in these consumer packaged goods, she's a good salesperson, and she went in and she managed to talk the local Walmart in Enid into carrying the product. The same thing has happened with Head Country, which is by my estimates the best barbecue sauce on the market is Head Country. It's an Oklahoma product. They managed to get it into Walmart, and now it's nationally distributed, right? But that's unusual. Usually you have to pay these slotting fees to get your stuff into Walmart or to get into a grocery store. And so lots of new consumer packaged goods and these little companies, if you're not tenacious enough and you don't know how to do it, never get there because they don't have the economic access to buyers and their product fails. They may have a great product and it may fail because they just don't have the ability to get that in front of customers. You can have an incomplete product protocol, and on this I use Cliff Hudson as an example of Sonic. My friend Kim Solik, who was a PhD in hospitality, and I used to have this company where we did product testing, and she did product testing for Sonic. And one of the things she always talks about is like they would do all these tests, and like they would present them to Cliff Hudson, who was the CEO of Sonic at the time, and he'd say, what I think we ought to do like a cherry vanilla lime slush or a margarita lime slush. And she'd be like, that's not what we tested. And he's like, well, I like margaritas. I think it'd go over well. Margarita lime slush. And she's like, Cliff, you're an old, Anglo-American male. That's not who goes to Sonic. That's not the demographic of Sonic. Who goes to Sonic? Anybody want to go? And so like they did the same thing. Like the Two Guys. How many of you watched the Two Guys commercials with Sonic? I literally want to either put a bullet through their brain or through my brain. I hate the Two Guys so very much. And that's not Sonic's demographic either. Two creepy old guys is not Sonic's, why do you have these two creepy old guys that's not your demographic. Who goes to Sonic? Kids and soccer moms. Soccer moms and kids go to Sonic. Margarita cherry lime slush is not something that appeals to those two groups. But because he's CEO, they tried it. Miserable failure. A lack of satisfaction of critical factors can be another issue, and I don't, by the way, with the margarita tray, I remember it was like something like that. It was, I don't know if that was the exact flavor, but a lack of satisfaction of critical factors. You know, is this better significantly than what I can get somewhere else? Bad timing. Lots of restaurants, restaurants are something that pop up and they start people. If you started a restaurant right before COVID hit, you probably didn't make it. You could have had a great restaurant, could have had a great idea, could have had all of this stuff, access to, and all of a sudden it dried up, right? Just bad timing. Poor quality. Microsoft Vista is the one that I use. You all don't even remember this, but Microsoft is a horrible company. They release crappy products onto a consuming, and then they fix it on the back end. And Vista was an example of that. It was horrible. It was a horrible operating system. Just terrible. Lack of market attractiveness. The market is too small for what you're trying to do. There may be somebody out there who wants to taste. There was a company that started and they've gone broke, I think, that was doing sort of disgusting flavors of ice cream, like centipede ice cream. Like, who wants that? There's a certain number of people who are going to be attracted to novelty, but that number is really, really small, right? Poor execution of the marketing mix. So you have a good idea, but you don't have a good promotional strategy. You don't have a good pricing strategy. You have problems with your logistics. So poor execution of the marketing mix. So how do you do this successfully? StageGate has a formal evaluation process for each stage to determine whether or not you should proceed to the next stage. Should you correct and proceed, or should you cut bait and run and move on to the next idea or product? So what is that? Strategy. Define the role the product will fill within the overall objectives of your company. Right? How does this fit within what your company is doing? If my family's company decided that all of a sudden we wanted to start manufacturing tennis shoes, well, that's not exactly a natural product extension of the hospitality entertainment industry, right? So you're going to combine your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, your SWOT, with an environmental scan. What's out there? What is it that we can do well? And where is there a need in this environment? An environmental scan. Then we're going to generate ideas. Where do these come from? Employees can be good sources of ideas. For example, 3M, they let their employees just go out and spend a certain amount of their time experimenting. One of their employees came up with this glue. 3M is known for adhesives that wasn't terribly adhesive. I mean, if what your company does is produce adhesives, this would have seemed like a big failure. But he's noticed that when you took it and put it on one piece of paper, you could tear it off of another piece of paper. It would stick, but you could tear it off cleanly and it wouldn't tear the other piece of paper. So they came up with Post-its, right? Consumers and suppliers using your sales force to be your eyes and ears and develop ideas based on what they're telling you, the feedback that they're telling you that they need. And then, of course, there are formal research and development labs for things like the Pfizer and Moderna COVID vaccine, right, that come up with these stuff. Screening and evaluation. Is it technically feasible? The company I worked for, our president was notorious for over-promising and underperforming all, but he would go in and he would just be determined that we were going to get in. Like, I'd be like, Jeff, we don't have this number of titles. And he would use an expletive that begins with F. The numbers live on the edge. That's what he would tell me. And I okay, you sure we can produce these in this amount of time, buddy? Really? Can you do this technically? A lot of times I was amazed how we did pull things out, but sometimes it was a remarkable failure. Then testing the ideas on your consumers. Develop detailed financial projections. How much is it going to cost to produce this? How much are we likely to get? How big is the market? How much of a market share can we get? Assessing that market. Step 4, so the business analysis. Then developing a prototype to efficiently manufacture the product, testing it in the lab, and then consumer testing. A lot of consumer packaged goods are tested in Columbus, Ohio. It's a sort of a bellwether. They used to say that about Ohio politically, as goes. That's no longer true, by the way. I don't think, particularly after this last election. As goes Ohio, so goes the nation. I'm not sure that that's always true anymore. And then testing, exposing the product to the actual prospective customers. So we can have different types of tests. We can have a standard market test where we attempt to sell through the normal distribution and a number of test markets. McDonald's does this. They release products at test markets of McDonald's when they came out with things like the McRib, new breakfast sandwiches when they came out with, McDonald's, the original breakfast sandwich was a sausage egg McMuffin. Then they branched out and they started doing breakfast burritos, and then they came up with this what I think is kind of disgusting product, which is this sausage, egg, and something or other sandwich that's made on a pancake bun. Yeah, that's called a McGriddle. I don't think it's terribly good, but apparently it sells enough that they've kept it along. So, through the normal distribution, a controlled test market, using outside services such as Symphony IRI to actually test the product for you, doing a simulated test market where you use a limited degree of exposure in things like shopping malls. They used to do this a lot. There was a company that did this at Quail Springs Mall. They're no longer there, but used to be walking around. They would say, "Hey, you want to come test ice cream?" I did that one time. They would give you various types of ice cream to test. Sometimes we can't do this, however. How do you test, for example, there's a museum in Arkansas that was founded by Alice Walton, who is the daughter of Sam Walton of Walmart fame. She wanted to develop this art museum in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. And how do you test something like that whether or not it will be a success? That's really hard to do, right? Because you have to sort of build the museum and see if people will come. Marfa, Texas is another place like this. There's artists started a whole sort of art colony there, and now there's all these art installations. And people actually travel to Marfa to see this, but that's something that's difficult to test, right? So you can't always test these things. Then positioning your product, commercialization, and going with either a regional, like I talked about movies, with the Milagro Beanfield War versus a full-scale launch. Any questions about new products? All right, so you have Thursday to work on the exam, so good luck. That's also the day that you have a week from today, so a week from Tuesday to get the exam in, but you have Thursday's class period to work on it. And Thursday is also the day that the critical thinking challenge on organizational behavior is due on D2L. Any questions? Yes.
For the organizational behavior thing, is there like a rubric posted online?
It's a 5-paragraph essay.
Okay.
So like introduction.
Can you go over what the specifics are of it again?
You have to determine whether or not organizations are more rational. It's posted in the assignment on D2L. So, like an introductory statement, organizations are more rational than consumers. These are the reasons. I will tell you that's the easy answer, right? And these are 3 examples of that, and then reach a conclusion based on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions from the extended section? All right. Well, if you have questions, think about it. Text me at 405-414-7054, and I will see you all a week from today.